Welcome Internet, the Psychologist Casual Review, and today I'm going to be reviewing Civilisation and its discontents. So in French it's translated by Malaise dans la Civilisation, which is a different idea. It's more of uneasiness in civilization. So the very interesting fact of this book is going to be an analysis on the collective of mankind rather than on individual situations, as this is what Freud was interested in at the later point in his life. And in the last time of his writings, that's really what's going to get him going, as this book was written in 1930. So, he's going to start, very interestingly enough, basically as a follow-up to The Future of an Illusion, which is a criticism of religion. The starting off point is a friend of his that realized that he missed something in The Future of an Illusion. That people believe in religion because there's a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being like in an ocean, un sentiment océanique in the French translation, which is the feeling of being part of a bigger whole, really. And it's something that Freud is going to spend quite some time on, as he finds it interesting because he doesn't have such a feeling. And that's going to make him not skeptical, but curious about it. So his interpretation on the desire to belong to a bigger whole is basically to come back, to regress at a point in life where the self and the object are not separated, are not apart, but part of a community, part of a whole. That in a way the individual is not an individual. He is with the mother combined in a way. So it's a very interesting starting point. But then after that he's going to say that there is a problem, that we have to outgrow those feelings, as those feelings cannot last forever. As we separate, become people, we become individuals, and we have to contend with society. And that's going to be the whole core of this book. That oceanic feeling is going to leave us, or at least fade away in the background, to a more tense relationship with society. So at the beginning of this book, Freud is going to assert the pleasure principle, i.e. that every human seeks pleasure and tries to avoid displeasure. So that's one of his earlier theories. And he's going to explain that in civilization, there are many ways of going to that. There's the fact, of course, of taking drugs, which is going to numb the pain. There's the fact of sublimating, meaning transforming one's drives into something else. And there's going to be the fact of building a family and reproducing one's structural family, and gaining some form of pleasure through the drives. But the drives have to be controlled, as they don't play well with the whole of civilization. Because for him, for Freud, the whole point of the individual is that they have to develop to the point where they're going to build a superego. That superego at the start being incarnated as authority, of course, the parents. But later on in life, it's going to be society in of itself. And that superego is really good at one thing: putting the guilt on the individual. So the individual is going to have to contend with the guilt of the superego forced onto him. First by the parents, as I stated, then by the whole of society. Individual is always basically caught into a crossfire between his drives and what is insinuated that he should do, or how he should be. And that's basically the struggle of the individual. But for Freud, what's going to be interesting is that he's going to analyze civilization as an extension of the individual. And I found that very interesting, because as he says, the individual is going to adapt to a time period and to his society. The society can change, but it's always going to be bound and binded by the individual. And there's this very interesting point he makes at the tail end of the book, that the superegos we have are tailored to the superego of society. And that's something I found very interesting. I was not aware that he developed, or I didn't remember that he had developed, the idea of a collective superego in which we are all shaped and molded by it in a linear way, or in a horizontal way, that it's there and it pushes the values and the ideals onto us, and then we have to answer them or fight against them. And for Freud, that collective superego is there to maintain society. In a way, we trade off our drives, our sense of power, for an innate sense of security, of belongingness to a system. And in a way, we create communities, systems, and nations to, in a way, give us a sense of self that's much wider than what we would have on our own. And it's also an asset for survival. Because Freud does talk about how, in a way, our collectiveness gives us an edge on other animals, that our civilization was able to come through. And this is what mankind became. Mankind became mankind because of civilization. So it's ludicrous to split off both of them. And this idea that is, for example, maintained by Rousseau, that without civilization we'd be all good, is really criticized by Freud. As for Freud, man is a wolf for man, taking the Hobbesian way of doing it. I even think he puts it in Latin. Homo lupus. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't remember quite saying, but it's in Latin in the text. So there you go. Man is a wolf for man. And that's what's going to make the whole point of Freud very interesting, is that for Freud there is no winning. And I think that that's something that we tend to forget nowadays with our conception of sociology, that there would be one day, as Marx said, an end to history. For Freud, no, there is no end to this. It's a complete and utter fight between society and the individual. And the individual is always going to try and push for his or her happiness. And society is always going to push for conformity and for order. And we are at constant odds against one another. In every one of us, in idiosyncratic ways, meaning in ways that belong to us, are going to be in conflict with the idea of society itself and what it imposes or superimposes onto us. So there is that very interesting way of seeing things, that we are at opposition, but there's also very something fundamental in Freud. It's that for Freud, there is, of course, the life drive, which is creative, sexual in essence, and there's the death drive, the aggressive drive, that our civilization is not free from that. It's embedded into our civilization of being aggressive, destructive, hurtful, breaking both individuals and other civilizations, and that it's ludicrous to believe that we can be free from it. It's something that's, in a way, part of us, constitutional, and within our core individually and collectively, and there's no disentangling it. In a way, we have to make something despite that aggressive drive, that destructive drive that is in animation constantly. And what helps us to prevent that drive from completely caving in is also the superego, as the superego imposes certain limits. And he's going to talk about it in reference to Totem and Taboo, where all the sons were pushed basically out of the sexual promiscuity, and only the father of the horde, that's a very famous concept of Freud, that father of the horde is going to have everything. He's going to be able to enjoy absolutely everything the tribe has to offer. Food, women, relationships, authority, and so on and so forth. There is no superego at that point. So the sons collectively, all together, choose to kill the father. But in killing the father, they also, in a way, feel guilt. And that guilt is going to be the premise of law, of limits, and of respectability. In a way, it's the baseline of civilization. Of course, Totem and Taboo is what Freud calls a scientific myth. I'm not quite sure it works that way, but I found the idea very interesting. That in a way it's the guilt that pushes us to create systems to try and prevent the guilt from exacerbating the death drive, and that our fundamental limit of the death drive is guilt. Find that very interesting, both at a personal and collective level, as it does seem to imply that the only thing that can really prevent us from self-destruction is not love, is not care, it's guilt. Interesting. And I think it's quite novel, strange enough, even if it's been like 90 years since it's been written. It's novel in our civilization to now say guilt has its place, and guilt plays a fundamental core role in how we deal with our death drive. So, interesting, and a very interesting idea. And also, I think that Freud hits the nail on the head many times in this text when he speaks about this concept that even though we progress technologically and scientifically, we're not going to be happier with the progress. We're not going to get to a point where our happiness is going to be guaranteed, because there's that much tension between ourselves, within ourselves, and with the system in large. And I found that so eye-opening, because when you see what's happening now, all our technology, all of the internet, all of the applications, all of everything, and yet we are incredibly unhappy as a civilization, as individuals. People are sad, frustrated, angry, and really discontent with everything. And I'm like, he was right, he was fundamentally right, it did not save us, and it never will, because the problem lies within rather than what is frustrating without. And that's a fundamental core principle that I think has not aged at all. Like, it's still so relevant. And I also think that people nowadays are also embarked on a fantasy that if we are to destroy this type of thinking, or this type of ideology, or if we push this, or if we push that, then we'll get at the point where everything will be okay. Nothing will ever be okay. And it's sad and depressing to speak about it, but it's also so very true that in a way we can only try and strive and struggle for something better, and we might achieve it from time to time, and that's worth it. But there's no perfection, nothing that's going to make us absolute. It's going to be a constant and eternal push, both inwards and with society. And that's why basically, in a way, there's always going to be an uneasiness in civilization. So that pretty much sums it up. It's a text that I quite liked and that I found very enjoyable. If you are new to psychoanalysis, it's I think a good start, as there's all the main core theories of Freud in it. And if you're an aficionado of psychoanalysis, still a good read. Still very fun and still very entertaining and well written. So that pretty much sums it up for me. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.